The laughter started before she even reached the firing line. 7 of America's most decorated special operations candidates, men who'd bled through Ranger School, Bud/S, and 3 combat deployments between them, standing in a loose half circle, pointing. Not at her rifle, not at her stance, at the back of her neck. A set of black coordinates tattooed small and precise just below the hairline, numbers that meant nothing to anyone at Camp Iron Ridge, except one man. Retired General Marcus Hale stood 40 feet away, and when his eyes landed on that tattoo, the color left his face like someone had pulled a drain. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. He didn't laugh. He didn't say a word. He just stared at the woman they were all mocking and felt something cold move through his chest that had nothing to do with the morning air. If you've never seen a room full of elite soldiers go completely silent, stay with me. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Drop your city or country in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Hit like, and let's begin. The morning brief at Camp Iron Ridge started at 05:30, same as every morning, in a cinderblock room that smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax. 31 candidates sat in folding chairs arranged in 4 uneven rows. Most of them had been awake since 4. A few had been awake since 2, running scenarios in their heads, rehearsing range procedures, quietly rehearsing the version of themselves they needed to be for the next 14 days. The evaluation cycle was called Iron Crucible, a 2-week assessment pipeline designed to identify candidates for a joint special operations selection program that nobody in the room was allowed to discuss by name. The candidates came from different branches: Rangers, Marine Raiders, Navy Sea Prove, 2 Army Special Forces warrant officers, 1 Air Force JTAC, with a reputation that preceded him like weather. Every man in the room had earned his seat through documented performance under documented pressure. Every man. That was the first thing Commander Ryan Mercer noticed when he walked through the door at 05:27, 3 minutes before the brief was scheduled to start. There was a woman in the 3rd row. She was seated near the wall, slightly apart from the others in the way that wasn't deliberate. The way that happened when nobody moved their chair to close the gap. She wore standard issue multicam with no unit patch, no name tape visible from across the room, a dark hood pulled up over her hair. Her hands rested flat on her thighs. She wasn't looking at her phone. She wasn't reviewing notes. She was simply sitting there, still in a way that most people aren't still. The kind of stillness that reads as either complete calm or complete shutdown, and it's impossible to tell which until something actually happens. Mercer set his folder on the podium. He was 41 years old, 6'2", broad through the shoulders, with a jaw that looked like it had been designed for official photographs. He'd come up through 75th Ranger Regiment, done 2 rotations in Afghanistan and 1 in Syria, and had spent the last 3 years running evaluation cycles just like this one. He was good at his job. He believed in his process. He had a precise internal model of what an elite operator looked like, moved like, and carried themselves like. And the woman in the 3rd row did not match any dimension of that model. He looked at her for approximately 2 seconds. Then he looked at the roster in his folder. Captain Elena Voss, Army. Evaluator, Precision Marksmanship. He read it twice. Then he looked up at her again, as if confirming the room hadn't rearranged itself. Mercer had been notified 3 days ago that an external evaluator would be joining the cycle for the marksmanship assessment phase. He'd been told the evaluator came with a strong recommendation from a general officer and that all he needed to know was that she was qualified. He hadn't been given a unit. He hadn't been given a background brief. He'd been told, essentially, to accept the assignment and move on. He had accepted it. He had not moved on. "Morning," he said to the room, and the room came to attention with the practiced snap of people who'd been doing it for years. "Sit." They sat. Elena Voss did not come to attention with the rest of them. She was already seated. She didn't move when they moved. She just continued sitting in that particular still way, watching Mercer the way you watch something you're not entirely sure about yet. Mercer began the brief. "Messan." The first 3 hours were administrative. Equipment checks, range safety brief, medical screening for anyone who'd come off a recent injury profile. The candidates rotated through stations in 2-man teams, signing forms, initializing 0 logs, drawing range ammunition from the armory cage in quantities that had to be counted twice by regulation. Elena moved through the stations without speaking unless spoken to, which wasn't often. She drew her ammunition, signed her forms, returned to the staging area near the firing line, and began laying out her equipment on the bench she'd been assigned. Her rifle was not standard issue. It was a modified bolt-action platform in a dark chassis with a suppressor already mounted. A serious piece of hardware that drew exactly the reaction you'd expect from a group of competitive shooters who noticed equipment the way other people noticed faces. Staff Sergeant Cole Maddox noticed first. Maddox was 29 from somewhere in rural Georgia and had the particular energy of a man who had been the best at every room he'd ever walked into and had long since stopped trying to hide how much that mattered to him. He was genuinely skilled. His qualification scores were among the top 3 in the cohort, and he wore his skill the way some men wear cologne, aggressively, and with the assumption that everyone noticed. He drifted to Elena's bench during the equipment staging period, hands in his pockets, affecting casual. "That's a lot of rifle for a marksmanship eval," he said. Elena didn't look up. She was checking the action, running a brass rod through the bore with the methodical focus of someone who'd done it several thousand times. "Yeah," she said. Maddox waited for more. None came. "What unit you with?" "Evaluator pool." "Sure, but before that..." She set down the brass rod. She looked at him with a flat, steady expression that contained no hostility and no warmth, just attention, clean and level. "Before that, I was somewhere else." Maddox smiled with one side of his mouth. It was the smile of a man deciding whether something was a joke or a challenge, and landing on both. "Right," he said. "Cool." He walked back to his own bench. Within 90 seconds, he'd said something to the operator beside him, a Marine raider named Decker, and Decker had glanced toward Elena with the particular look of a man who has just been told something he finds funny. The firing line at Camp Iron Ridge ran east-west, 860 yards of cleared range cut into a ridgeline above a dry valley floor. The targets were steel, circular, varying diameter, placed at intervals from 100 yards out to 940. The morning session was a standard diagnostic. Candidates engaged targets at assigned distances, data was recorded, adjustments were made, and the whole thing was repeated. Basic shooting assessment, nothing dramatic about it except that everything here was being watched and measured and written down and would eventually determine who went forward and who went home. Elena's role for the morning was observer and advisor. She moved down the line between relays, watching form, watching trigger discipline, watching how candidates responded to environmental variables. The wind off the valley floor was coming in from the northwest at something between 8 and 12 knots, shifting every few minutes in the way mountain wind does, offering no clean rhythm to read. Most of the candidates were compensating late. They were calculating their windage hold-off after they'd already committed to the shot, which meant they were always a step behind the actual conditions. She stopped behind a candidate named Whitfield, Army Special Forces, tall, technically clean form, clearly experienced, and watched him put 2 rounds wide on a 600-yard target. "You're reading the flag," she said. Whitfield lowered his rifle. "Flags are all I've got. Flags show you where the wind was. Watch the mirage. Low shimmer, right now, traveling left at about 7 knots. You're holding 4 MOA right, should be 6. Whitfield looked at the mirage line, settled, shot. The steel rang. He turned around with a look that was something close to surprised. "How'd you Do it again," she said, and moved on. 3 benches down, she stopped behind a Marine raider named Okafor, who was getting eaten alive by a consistent 2 o'clock flyer. She watched his trigger pull for 1 full round cycle and identified the problem in the brake. He was anticipating recoil, a minor preload building in his right shoulder just before the break. "You're bracing," she told him. "I'm not bracing. Your right shoulder loads before the break. Not much. Enough." He fired again. She could see it from behind. A subtle forward lean that started a quarter second too early. "There," she said. Okafor was quiet for a moment. Then, "How do I fix it?" "Dry fire 200 repetitions with no round in the chamber. Break the anticipation pattern first, then live fire." She moved on before he could answer. This was how the morning went. She moved, she watched, she said the specific thing, and nothing extra. A few of the candidates listened, and their groups tightened. A few nodded without adjusting and continued doing what they'd been doing. A few watched her with poorly concealed skepticism. This hooded woman with a borrowed authority, correcting men who'd been shooting in combat conditions for years. Maddox was in that last group. Commander Mercer watched Elena from the command position at midline, arms crossed, saying nothing. His senior NCO, Master Sergeant Thorne, came up beside him during the break between relays. "She's not wrong," Thorne said quietly. "I know she's not wrong," Mercer said. "Whitfield hit Steele first time she corrected him. First time all morning." "I noticed." Thorne picked up his radio and made a notation in his log. "So what's the problem?" Mercer was quiet for a moment. He watched Elena moving back up the line, hands behind her back, hood still up despite the morning heat that had built since sunrise. "I don't know who she is," he said. "I don't know where she comes from. I don't know her background. I don't know her record. I have nothing but a memo from a general I've met once telling me she's qualified." He paused. "I run evaluations. I need to know who's running them with me." Thorne said nothing for a moment. Then, "You could just ask her." "I did ask." "What'd she say?" "She gave me her name and rank." Thorne almost smiled. "That's technically an answer." Mercer uncrossed his arms. "Yeah," he said. "It is." The afternoon session started at 1300 and ran through 1600. The assignment for the first relay was a wind call problem. Variable crosswind, multiple targets, candidates required to log their hold-off data before each shot and justify their calculation in writing. It was the kind of problem that separated shooters who understood ballistics from shooters who'd simply memorized solutions, and it was reliably brutal. By 1400, the line had gone quiet in the specific way that happens when a group of competitive people realize simultaneously that the problem is harder than expected. Targets were being missed. Hold-off data in the logs was all over the map. The wind had shifted twice in the last 40 minutes, and nobody had fully caught up. Maddox was at bench 7, third from the right end of the line. He'd been tight-lipped since the morning session, working methodically, and his data log showed consistent misses on the 800-yard target, a pattern that meant his dope chart was slightly off, and he hadn't found the correction yet. He fired again. Miss. He worked the bolt, chambered, fired, miss. He set the rifle down on the bipod and sat back and breathed through his nose. He could feel people around him not looking at him, which was worse than them looking. Elena was at the end of the bench, checking data logs. She moved toward him, looked at his log, looked at the target. "Wind shifted left 4 minutes ago," she said. "You haven't adjusted." "I adjusted at 1340. "Wind shifted again at 1403. He looked at her. "You've been timing it." "I've been watching it." He stared at her for a moment. Then he looked at the range, the grass on the valley floor, the heat shimmer above the berm, the flag at the mid-range station hanging limp, then moving, then limp again. "Fine," he said. "What's the hold?" "What do you think it is?" He looked back at the target, calculated. 7 MOA. 8. That flag's behind a windbreak. You're seeing about 60% of what's actually moving down range. He picked up the rifle, made the adjustment, settled, fired. The steel rang. He worked the bolt, chambered, fired without adjusting. The steel rang again. He lowered the rifle. He didn't say anything right away. Then Decker, at the bench behind him, said something low, and the two men beside him laughed. The kind of laugh that's aimed at something specific. Maddox set the rifle down. He turned around. Elena was already looking at the next candidate. Maddox watched her for a second. Then his eyes went to the back of her neck. The ink there, half visible where the hood had shifted in the afternoon heat. Dark lines, small and precise. Numbers, coordinates, something official-looking that wasn't official to anyone here. He said, loud enough to carry 3 benches in either direction, "Hey, what's the tattoo?" Elena didn't turn around. "Coordinates," she said. "Coordinates for what?" "A place." "Yeah, I figured it was a place." "Which place?" She didn't answer. Decker said, "Classified coordinates, very cool, very operator." He said operator with a specific inflection that meant the opposite of respect. Maddox said, "You know what? That's actually a pretty good bit. Get some coordinates, put them on your neck, walk around looking mysterious." He paused. "Where'd you get them? Google Maps?" The laughter that came was the kind that isn't really about what was said. It's permission laughter, the kind that tells you the room has decided it's okay to laugh now, which means the room has also decided that the target doesn't matter enough to protect. Elena finished writing in the data log she was holding. She capped the pen. She set the log on the bench. Then she turned around. She looked at Maddox. He was standing with his arms loose, wearing the expression of someone who's just gotten a reaction they expected. "Bench 3, she said. "You're reading your conditions off the mid-range flag. The flag's in a wind shadow. Add 2 MOA right, or you'll miss the entire afternoon." He blinked. "I wasn't asking about my bench." "I know," she said, "but that's the answer that matters." She picked up her clipboard and walked to bench 4. General Marcus Hale arrived at Camp Iron Ridge at 15:45 in a dark SUV that pulled through the main gate with minimal ceremony. One vehicle, no escort, the kind of arrival that meant the man inside it had long since stopped needing to announce himself. He was 63 years old and had the build of a man who'd once been physically formidable and still carried the frame of it, though it had settled into something denser and more deliberate with age. His hair was white at the temples and short. He walked with a slight forward lean that wasn't quite a limp, but wasn't quite normal either. The residue of something old and insufficiently repaired. He came at the invitation of the cycle commander, who'd requested senior mentorship observation for the final 2 days of assessment. It was a standard request, a standard visit. Nothing about it should have surprised anyone. But when Hale stepped out of the SUV and his eyes moved across the active range, the line of candidates, the benches, the downrange steel, and landed on a figure in a dark hood at the far end of the line, he stopped walking. His aide, a young lieutenant named Forsyth, came up beside him. "Sir? Something wrong?" Hale didn't answer for a moment. He watched the figure at the end of the line, the hood, the rifle, the way she moved, that measured, deliberate economy that looked like nothing until you knew what it cost to learn it. "Who authorized that evaluator?" he said, very quietly. Forsyth checked his tablet. "The assignment memo came through JSOC Liaison, sir. General Whitmore's office." Hale nodded slowly. He watched her correct a candidate's trigger discipline with 3 words and a gesture. He watched the candidate fire and hit steel. "General Hale," Forsyth said. "Should I—" "No," Hale said. "Don't do anything." He stood where he was and watched her work and said nothing else. The evening portion of the day was a combined classroom and PT block, an hour of physical standards assessment followed by a 90-minute block on mission planning fundamentals that used historical case studies as teaching material. Standard curriculum, nothing unusual about it. The classroom was in the main building, a long rectangular room with whiteboard walls and a ceiling-mounted projector that worked most of the time. Folding tables, the same style chairs as the morning brief room, a stand-up fan in the corner that oscillated on its slowest setting. Lieutenant Forsyth ran the presentation because Mercer had been pulled into a logistics call. Forsyth was 24 and new to this assignment and visibly anxious about it in the specific way of someone performing competence in front of people who've earned it. The case study was a 2004 mountain evacuation, a small unit action in a region that the slides identified only by grid coordinates and a generic operational designation. The material had been partially declassified several years prior and stripped of most identifying information, which was why it was suitable for use in a training environment. What remained was a tactical narrative. Small element, hostile contact, civilian casualty management under fire, final covered extraction. Forsyth clicked through the slides with a pointer. The room was half attentive in the way rooms get when the day has already been long and the body is demanding negotiation. Some of the candidates were taking notes. Most were watching the screen with the particular flatness of people waiting for something to be relevant to them. Slide 11 was a tactical overlay, topographic lines, a route marked in red, a ridge position marked with a small X. Slide 12 was a combat photograph, It came up fast because Forsyth was clicking through at a pace that suggested he hadn't memorized the sequence, and he moved past it in under 2 seconds before catching himself and moving back. But in those 2 seconds, across a room where approximately 20 pairs of trained eyes were watching the screen, the image registered. It was a black and white photograph, slightly degraded, taken from a distance that suggested a long lens. It showed a ridgeline, rock and scrub and low cloud, and on the ridgeline a single figure in a prone shooting position. The figure wore a hood. The image was tight enough to show the rifle, the hands on the stock, but not the face. In the lower right corner of the image, barely legible, a date stamp and a set of grid coordinates. Forsyth caught himself. Sorry, wrong slide. Skip that one. He clicked forward. 3 candidates turned to look at Elena, who was seated in the second row. She was looking at the whiteboard to the left of the screen. She hadn't looked at the photograph. At the back of the room, General Marcus Hale, who had come in quietly during the mission planning intro and taken a seat against the wall, sat very still. He had recognized the grid coordinates in the lower right corner before the slide changed. He recognized them because he had been the officer who'd called in the fire support request from the base of that ridge 12 years ago, in a valley that the United States Army had done its operational best to forget, and he remembered, with the clarity that only comes from things that mark you permanently, what had happened on that ridge over the following 28 hours. He looked at the back of Elena's neck. The hood had shifted during PT. The ink was partially visible. The same numbers. The exact same numbers. Hale sat back in his plastic folding chair. He exhaled slowly. Around the room, a few of the candidates were still exchanging glances, the photograph already fading from attention, replaced by the next slide and Forsyth's nervous narration. Maddox was writing something in his notebook. Decker had his arms crossed and his eyes on the ceiling. Nobody in the room understood what they had just seen, except one man, and he wasn't going to say a word about it tonight. The barracks at night had a particular sound: boots on concrete, water running through pipes behind walls, the distant pop of the range's steel cooling in the evening air. Elena sat on the edge of her assigned bunk in the corner room she'd been given alone, the way evaluators always were, and she unlaced her boots in the dark. She didn't turn on the light. She sat for a while after the boots came off. Her hands were on her knees. Outside the single window, the camp was going quiet, in the methodical way of military installations. Lights going to standby in blocks, the perimeter lighting still on, someone's radio in the next building chirping once and going silent. She reached up and touched the back of her neck, not the tattoo itself, the skin above it. Habit. She breathed. Then she lay down on the bunk without pulling the blanket back, stared at the ceiling, and was still. In the room 2 doors down, Maddox said to Decker, very quietly, "You see Hale's face when that slide came up?" Decker said, "He looked like he'd seen a ghost." Maddox said, "Yeah." A pause. "What do you think that was about?" Another pause. "I don't know," Decker said. "But I'm starting to think that tattoo isn't from Google Maps." The room went quiet. Outside, the perimeter lights hummed, and General Marcus Hale sat alone in his quarters with a glass of water he wasn't drinking, looking at the wall, thinking about a ridge he hadn't been back to in 12 years, and a soldier who had stayed on it alone when every other option had run out. He thought about what he knew. He thought about what nobody else in that camp knew, and he thought about what was going to happen when they found out. Morning came to Camp Iron Ridge the way it always did in that part of the country. Not gradually, not gently, but all at once, the light cracking over the eastern ridgeline like something had been waiting all night to get through. By 04:45, the camp was already awake, the generators running, the smell of the mess hall carrying across the open ground between buildings, with the particular authority of institutional coffee that had been brewing since before anyone arrived to drink it. Elena was already on the range. Not shooting, just standing at the far end of the line with a spotting scope on a folding tripod, working through data. She'd been there since 4:15, logging wind readings every 10 minutes, building a picture of the morning condition cycle before anyone else thought to start. The valley floor in the early morning produced a thermal pattern different from the afternoon. Cooler, denser air moving in from the north, the mirage line low and slow, The effective wind at distance somewhere between 6 and 9 knots, depending on what the terrain did to it, between here and the steel. She filled 3 pages of a pocket notebook before the first candidate hit the range at 0550. Nobody noticed she'd been there. The second day's schedule opened with a live-fire stress inoculation block, a timed series of shooting problems designed to degrade performance through physical exhaustion before demanding technical precision. The candidates ran 400 meters in full kit, transitioned to the firing line within 90 seconds, and were required to engage a series of targets at varying distances with a specified round count. Heart rate up, hands unsteady, breathing compromised, the range officer calling corrections and time hacks over the radio with the particular cadence that was designed to crowd your head and make you feel late even when you weren't. It was a good test because it was honest. Combat shooting didn't happen in ideal conditions. It happened when your body had already spent most of what it had. Maddox ran the 400 faster than anyone else and hit the line at 68 seconds, just under the transition window, and dropped immediately into his firing position with the efficiency of a man who drilled this particular sequence so many times it had become reflexive. His first 3 shots were tight. His 4th was wide. He fired again, wide. He recalculated, fired, wide. Elena was behind him and slightly right, watching. "Your bolt speed's off," she said. He ignored her. "You're rushing the reload, slowing your natural point of aim reset." He fired, wide again. He sat back on his heels. His breathing was still elevated from the run. He pressed one hand flat against the dirt and made himself breathe through his nose. "Maddox," she said. "I've got it," he said. "You don't." He turned his head to look at her. There was sweat on his face and something in his expression that was working hard to stay in its lane. "I've been doing this for 8 years, he said. "I know," she said. "That's why the habit's so locked in, you can't feel it anymore." He stared at her. She didn't look away. She wasn't being hard about it. There was nothing aggressive in her tone, no edge designed to humiliate. She was just saying the thing as clearly as she could because that was the only way she knew how to say things. He turned back to the rifle. He slowed the bolt. He reset. He fired. The steel rang. He fired 4 more times, 4 more rings. He lowered the rifle and lay flat for a moment with his cheek against the stock, and breathed. Then he sat up and cleared the chamber and set the rifle on the bipod, and said without looking at her, "Thank you." It came out quieter than he intended. Elena wrote something in her notebook and moved to the next bench. Mercer watched the morning block from the command position and said very little. He had Thorne beside him, as always, and General Hale had arrived at the observation platform at 0610 in civilian clothes with a coffee cup that looked like it came from outside the camp. Hale watched without commenting. He had the quality of a man who'd spent decades observing and had long since learned that the most useful thing he could do during an observation was stay out of the way of what he was trying to see. At the mid-block break, Mercer walked to the water station near the command post and found Elena there refilling a bottle. He stood beside her and filled his own and did not speak for a moment. Then, "Where'd you train?" Elena capped her bottle. "Various places." "Give me one." She looked at him, not hostile, just measuring. "Bragg," she said. "For a while." "And before Bragg?" "Before Bragg was a while ago." Mercer nodded slowly. He looked out at the range. Several candidates were at their benches doing equipment maintenance, swapping out batteries in their optics, cleaning brass out of their actions. "I need to know who I'm working with," he said. "That's not a power play. I just need to know." "You know my name and my rank. That's not what I mean." "I know what you mean," she said, "and I understand why you're asking." She put the water bottle in her thigh pocket. "But I'm not going to answer questions about where I've been. That's not me being difficult, that's just how it is." He looked at her. She met the look without flinching and without apology. "What I can tell you," she said, "is that every correction I've given this morning is correct. You can verify that in the logs. Your candidates hit steel when they applied the adjustment and missed when they didn't. That's the only thing that matters out here." Mercer was quiet. "The rest," she said, "is about me, and I'm not the one being evaluated." She walked back toward the line. Mercer stood at the water station for a moment longer. Then he went back to the command post and said nothing to Thorne about the conversation, and Thorne, who had seen enough of Mercer's face over 3 years to read it, did not ask. The midday break ran from 11:30 to 1300. Most of the candidates ate in the mess hall and went horizontal on whatever flat surface they could find, banking sleep against the afternoon, which everybody knew would be harder than the morning. It usually was on day 2. Maddox sat at a table near the window with Decker and a ranger named Kowalski, who had the particular quality of someone who listened to everything and said very little. They were eating without talking much, the food disappearing with the mechanical focus of men refueling rather than eating, and the conversation that did happen came in short bursts and then stopped. Then Decker said, "You know what I looked up last night?" Maddox didn't look up from his tray. "Don't care." "Those coordinate formats, the ones on her neck." Kowalski looked up. Maddox kept eating. "They're just numbers." "They're a specific format," Decker said. "Military grid, 8-digit MGRS. And the zone prefix on them. I looked it up. It falls in a region that's been in and out of SOCOM operational areas for the last 15 years. Maddox set his fork down. Not dramatically. He just set it down. "You looked up someone's tattoo," he said. "I was curious." "That's..." Maddox started, then stopped. He picked up his fork again. "What region?" Decker told him. Kowalski went back to his food, but his jaw was moving a little slower than it had been. Maddox was quiet for a long moment, then, "A lot of people have gone through that region. Doesn't mean anything." "Sure," Decker said. "Coordinates on a tattoo don't mean she was there for anything significant." "Sure," Decker said again, in the same tone as before. Maddox looked at him. "What?" Decker shrugged. "Nothing. I just think Hale's face last night meant something." "Hale's face could mean a lot of things." "When was the last time you saw a retired 4-star go pale at a photograph?" Nobody answered that. The mess hall hummed around them. Someone was running water in the kitchen. A ceiling fan above the serving line turned slow and slightly off balance, clicking at the same point in every rotation. Kowalski said, without looking up, "Whatever she was, she's here now running an evaluation, so maybe just let her run it." Neither Maddox nor Decker said anything to that. But the afternoon session opened with a problem that wasn't on the schedule. This was deliberate. One of the consistent features of Iron Crucible was that the published schedule was a baseline that the cadre modified without notice to assess adaptability. At 1300, instead of the precision long-range block the candidates had been briefed for, Mercer announced a command and control exercise embedded in a live-fire problem. Teams of 3. Designated team leader, designated shooter, designated spotter navigator. The team leader received a fragmented operations order via radio, incomplete, partially corrupted, missing key grid references, and was required to reconstruct the mission parameters in real time, assign roles, and execute an engagement sequence within a defined time window. The radio traffic was deliberately degraded. Static, broken transmissions, a simulated communications-denied environment where the team had to cross-reference what they'd received against the terrain and make decisions with incomplete information. It was a good problem. It was a real problem, the kind that happened, the kind where the difference between operators who'd trained and operators who'd trained under pressure became clear and uncomfortable fast. Elena was assigned as an observer for Team 4, Maddox as team leader, a Marine raider named Santos as the shooter, a Special Forces warrant officer named Greer as spotter navigator. She stayed back. Her job in this block was observation and scoring, not correction. She had a scoring sheet and a stopwatch and a radio set to the cadre net. Team 4 received their fragmentary order at 1309. Maddox pressed the radio to his ear, listened, and immediately started writing on his notepad. The transmission was broken. 3 seconds of clear audio, 4 of static, 2 more clear, then static again. He caught fragments. A grid reference, partial. A time window. A target description. 2 steel silhouettes at unknown distance, presented in sequence, the second appearing only after the first was engaged. He looked at Greer. "What did you get?" Greer checked his notes. "Partial grid, 8 digits, but the last 2 are cut. Could be a 200-meter zone. Santos? Santos was already glassing the range through the spotting scope, working the terrain. I've got the line. Can't confirm distance without the full grid. Estimate it. Santos worked for a moment. 600, maybe 650. 620, Elena said from behind them. All three men looked at her. That's not part of your assessment, Maddox said. No, she said. It's not. He looked at her for one more second, then he looked at Santos. 620, log it. I thought you said, log it, Maddox said. We'll verify on glass. Santos verified on glass. He looked up. 620, he said quietly. He didn't say anything else. The engagement sequence ran from 13:14 to 13:22, 8 minutes within the time window. Santos engaged the first silhouette clean. The second presented at an unexpected angle, partially masked by a terrain feature, and Santos adjusted without being told. Both targets down. Data logged. When Mercer called the end of the block and teams reported back to the command post, Team 4's scoring sheet came in with the fastest time and the cleanest execution of the afternoon. Maddox, walking back past Elena, slowed. He didn't stop, but he slowed. 620, he said, without looking at her. Thermal column off that rock face, she said. Creates a consistent reference point. Easy read once you know what to look for. He nodded once and kept walking. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't nothing either. Hale found Mercer at the command post at 1500 during the transition between blocks. He came without his aide, without ceremony, and sat down in the empty chair beside Mercer's desk as if he belonged there, which, given rank and institutional history, he did. How's the cycle going? Hale asked. Strong cohort, Mercer said. Better than last rotation. The Evaluator. Mercer looked at him. Sir? Elena Voss. Hale said her name with the particular flatness of someone who'd said it before, in other rooms, under other circumstances. How's she doing? She's effective, Mercer said carefully. Her corrections are good. Candidates respond when they apply them. He paused. She's not communicative about her background. No, Hale said. She wouldn't be. Mercer waited. How much do you want to know? Hale asked. Whatever you think I need. Hale looked at the range, the steel targets downrange, small and bright in the afternoon light. She was attached to a classified element for 5 years, he said. I can't tell you the unit designation. I can tell you the operational tempo was significant. She did things in places that don't appear in any public record and most of the internal ones. He stopped there. And the tattoo, Mercer said. Hale's expression didn't change. The tattoo is hers, he said. That's all I'll say about it. Mercer digested this. Why is she here, running a mid-level evaluation cycle? Because she asked for it, Hale said. She came off an extended operational assignment and she asked for something stateside, something with candidates, something forward. He picked up his coffee and looked at it and set it back down. She spent a long time doing work that nobody watched. I think she wanted to do work where she could see what it produced. Mercer thought about that. The men don't respect her, he said. Not yet. No, Hale said. They don't. That going to be a problem? Hale looked at him. Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite a smile, not quite sadness, something that lived in the space between them. Ask me that again in 2 days, he said. The evening block was combatives and close quarters, a structured sparring assessment in the camp's indoor training bay, matted floor, fluorescent lights, the smell of sweat and rubber already worked into the walls from months of prior use. Not full contact, but not light either. The purpose was to evaluate situational aggression, recovery under physical pressure, and the capacity to apply technique when the body was already running on reserve. Elena was not scheduled to participate in the combatives assessment. Her role for this cycle was precision marksmanship and tactical observation. She had no formal assignment in the close quarters block. She was in the observation area when it started, seated on a bench against the wall with her notebook, recording candidate performance notes that she'd been asked to contribute to the overall evaluation file. The first 3 pairings went normally. The candidates were good. Most of them had extensive combatives training, and the level of technical proficiency in the room was high in the way that it tends to be in cohorts selected for this kind of program. Then Decker, during the 4th pairing against a Rangers candidate named Abrams, caught a clean shot to the ribs and went down harder than expected. And when he came back up, there was something in his face that wasn't quite pain and wasn't quite anger, but was the thing that lives right between them. And the last 30 seconds of that pairing got rougher than the first 2 minutes. Mercer called it. In the break between pairings, Decker sat on the mat and breathed and said, to no one in particular but loudly enough to carry, "You know what would be funny? If the mystery evaluator got on the mat." A few people looked at Elena. She kept writing. "Probably a no," Decker said. "Marksmanship people usually aren't mat people." Maddox said nothing. One of the Special Forces warrant officers, Greer from Team 4, looked at Elena. "You train combatives?" Elena looked up from her notebook. Some. Some like a little or some like a lot?" "Some like enough," she said. Greer nodded thoughtfully, the way people do when they're deciding whether to push a thing. He decided not to. But Decker wasn't finished. "I just think," he said, working his ribs with one hand, "that if you're going to evaluate whether other people can perform under pressure, you should be willing to demonstrate that you can." The room was quieter than it had been. Elena set her pen down. She looked at Decker for a moment with that level, unreadable attention that was starting to become familiar to the people in this camp. "Who's the next pairing?" she said. Mercer, who had heard everything from the doorway, looked at his roster. "Santos and Kowalski." "After that one," Elena said. Something shifted in the room. Not dramatic, just a small collective adjustment, the way air moves when a window opens. Decker's expression changed. "You don't have to," he started. "I know," she said. She picked up her pen and went back to writing. Santos and Kowalski paired off. The pairing was good. Both men were technically sharp, and the exchange had a quality of mutual respect that made it more interesting to watch than most. It went the full time. When Mercer called the end, Elena set her notebook on the bench beside her and stepped onto the mat. She looked at Decker. He stood up. What happened in the next 4 minutes would be referenced later, in conversations between candidates that happened in low voices in barracks rooms and mess hall corners, and it would never quite be described the same way twice, because the people watching it were seeing different things depending on what they'd already decided to believe about the woman on the mat. What they all agreed on was this: she was not where she was supposed to be. Not in any bad sense, more that she occupied space in a way that was slightly wrong from his perspective, slightly off from where he'd committed his weight, and by the time he adjusted, she'd already moved. It happened 3 times in the first 2 minutes. Not throws, not dramatic takedowns, just a consistent quality of not being available for what he was trying to do, and then being somewhere else, and using the small window of his recovery to create pressure. In the 3rd minute, he got a grip on her left arm and pulled. She let him pull, went with it, and used the momentum to enter his space low and place one knee behind his and take his base without any apparent force. And then they were on the mat and she was behind him in a control position with one arm across his throat. Not hard, not punishing, just definitively there, and held it for 3 seconds before releasing and stepping back. Decker lay on the mat for a moment. Then he sat up. He didn't say anything right away. He was breathing through his mouth, working through whatever was happening in his chest that wasn't quite physical. Elena stepped off the mat and picked up her notebook. The room was completely silent. Then Maddox said, "Where'd you train that?" She sat down. She opened the notebook to the page she'd been on. "Various places," she said. She picked up her pen. She started writing. Across the room, General Hale, who had appeared in the doorway at some point during the pairing and stood there with his coffee cup and his unreadable face, watched her write for a moment. Then he looked at the floor. Then he looked at nothing in particular, the way a man looks when something he's been holding in his chest for a long time shifts slightly. Not releases, just shifts. And he doesn't know yet whether that's better or worse. He turned and walked back down the hallway. His footsteps on the concrete made no sound worth mentioning. The ceiling lights hummed. Decker sat on the mat for another 30 seconds. Then he got up. He walked to the water station against the wall. He filled a cup and drank it. He filled another and held it in both hands and stared at the wall above the door for a long moment. Then he said to no one, or possibly to Maddox, or possibly to himself, "She let me get that grip." Maddox looked at him. "She let me get it," Decker said again. "She wasn't trying to stop me from getting it. She wanted me to pull." Neither of them said anything else. The training bay settled into the ambient sounds of men recovering, water running, equipment being collected, the Velcro of gear being adjusted. Someone turned off one of the two overhead lights by accident, and the room went half dark, and nobody immediately moved to fix it. Elena's pen moved across the notebook page. Her handwriting was small and even, each letter the same pressure as the last, the lines straight without the aid of ruled paper. She wrote the way she did everything else, without waste, without self-consciousness, without any apparent awareness of what the room around her was doing, which was watching her, not with hostility anymore, not with the open contempt of that first morning, with something quieter, something that didn't have a clean name yet but was taking shape in the space where the laughter used to be. Outside, the camp had gone fully dark. The training bay's remaining overhead light threw one half of the room in yellow and left the other in shadow, and nobody had moved to fix it, and the half-dark had settled in like it belonged there. Candidates drifted out in ones and twos, pulling gear, not talking much. The session was done. The day was done. The kind of tired that comes from 2 days of sustained high-performance output had arrived for everyone in that room and was not negotiable. Maddox was the last one out besides Elena. He stopped at the door. Didn't turn around fully, just angled his shoulder toward the room. "You eating in the mess?" he said. Elena was capping her pen. "Later." He nodded and left. She sat alone for a while in the half-dark training bay, notebook closed on her knee, looking at nothing specific. The mat where she'd been 4 minutes ago, the water station, the door. She wasn't processing the pairing. That was done. It had required what it required, and now it was over. She was listening to the camp settle, the way it did every night, block by block going quiet, until what remained was the perimeter lighting and the generators and the specific silence of a place where tired people were trying to be unconscious. She got up, turned off the remaining light, and walked out. The storm arrived without significant warning. The forecast had mentioned a 20% chance of afternoon thunderstorms pushing in from the northwest, which in mountain country during summer meant almost nothing. 20% was background noise, the kind of number that made meteorologists feel responsible without committing them to anything. By the time the Weather Service updated its advisory to a severe thunderstorm watch for the region, it was 0200, and everyone at Camp Iron Ridge was asleep. The first lightning hit a ridge to the north at 0247. Elena was awake before the thunder finished. She sat up in the dark of her corner room and listened. The sound had a particular quality, not distant, not abstract. Close and getting closer, the kind of proximity that you feel in your sternum before you hear it with your ears. She got up and went to the window. The valley below the camp was already moving, not with wind yet, but with light, the low cloud base strobing in long, irregular pulses. The ridgelines appearing and disappearing, the dry floor of the valley gone silver and then black, and then silver again. A second strike hit somewhere to the west, closer, and the thunder that followed was a rolling concussive pressure that rattled the window frame in its sill. She got dressed in under 90 seconds. The storm was fully over the camp by 0320. Lightning and thunder arrived together, which meant the strikes were within a mile, and the rain came in a sudden dense sheet that turned the open ground between buildings into moving water within 4 minutes. The wind was not constant. It came in short, violent pulses that hit the structures and died and hit again from a slightly different direction, the way mountain-channeled gusts behave when terrain is funneling them. The camp's alert system had been triggered at 0315, a recorded tone over the PA followed by a brief text to duty phones. All personnel stand by. Weather event. Remain in assigned quarters. Most people stayed put. Most people. The radio traffic started at 0331. Thorne's voice first on the cadre net, clipped and professional. All positions. This is command. Weather hold in effect. All range activities suspended. Report any personnel not in quarters. A pause. Then, command. This is range south. I've got one bay door open, and it wasn't open at last check. Could be wind. Another pause. Then, command. This is barracks 2. Candidate Whitmore is not in his rack. Check the head. The common room. Not there. Thorne again. Say again, barracks 2. Whitmore. Not in quarters. Checked 20 minutes ago during weather check. Thought he was in the head. He's not. Elena was already in her rain gear, standing in the hallway outside her room, when she heard Thorne's traffic on the small radio she'd clipped to her chest before leaving the building. She keyed the cadre net. This is Voss. I'm mobile. What's Whitmore's last known? A brief silence. The kind that had a texture to it, the cadre net hesitating on a non-command voice calling in. Then Thorne, Voss, return to quarters. What's his last known? Another pause. Then Mercer's voice, slightly rough with sleep but alert. Voss, stand down. We've got duty personnel handling it. She didn't answer. She stepped outside. The rain hit her immediately, hard and cold and moving sideways in the gusts. The visibility was poor. The camp's floodlights threw light that the rain broke into a kind of scattered, diffuse glow that made distances hard to read. The ground was already saturated, each step displacing water from the low points in the packed dirt. She stood for a moment and looked at the camp. She knew Whitmore's background from the evaluation file. Army, former 82nd Airborne, 3 deployments including one in a valley in eastern Afghanistan that had produced 2 Silver Stars and 1 incomplete mental health referral that somebody had signed off on without following up. He'd been performing well in the cycle, clean scores, strong tactical instinct. But she'd noticed during the combatives block a particular quality in his reaction to sudden loud noise. A millisecond delay followed by an overcorrection, the body bracing for something the conscious mind had already identified as non-threatening. It was the kind of thing that most people wouldn't notice and that mattered enormously in certain conditions. Certain conditions, for example, like a nighttime thunderstorm with close lightning and rolling concussive thunder over a mountain camp. She looked at the range. The bay door that range south had reported open faced south toward the tree line at the bottom of the ridge line. If someone had left for the barracks without a clear destination, not really conscious of where they were going, following the muscle memory of previous environments, the range was the only direction that made sense. It was where they'd spent all their waking hours. It was the terrain their nervous system knew. She moved toward the range. The radio traffic behind her was getting complicated. Mercer was now on the net, pulling duty positions to report, organizing a systematic search by sector. He had 4 personnel assigned to the barracks perimeter, 2 to the motor pool, 1 to the armory, which was protocol because the armory was where the weapons were, and a disoriented candidate with combat history and access to weapons was a specific kind of problem that had its own checklist. Thorne's voice cut through. Armory check. Weapons secure? Range south. Armory secure. All weapons present and locked. Elena exhaled something she hadn't realized she was holding. The lightning came again. A branching strike to the north that lit the ridgeline and the range and the tree line below it in a single white frame. In that fraction of a second, she saw it, a figure at the far end of the firing line, at bench 8, the last bench on the right. Standing, not prone, not in any kind of shooting position, just standing in the rain, face toward the downrange valley. She moved. The mud at the base of the range berm was ankle-deep in the drainage channels. She went around them, staying on the packed surface of the range access road, which was wet but solid. The rain was loud in a way that made distance judgment difficult. Everything sounded closer, the thunder especially, and she had to manage the instinct to track each sound as a threat, the old habit of environmental parsing that never fully went away. She reached the far end of the firing line in 2 minutes. Whitmore was standing at bench 8 with his hands at his sides. He was in a t-shirt and PT shorts, no jacket, no shoes. The rain had soaked him completely. He was looking at the far end of the range at nothing, at the valley floor that was invisible in the dark. She came up beside him slowly, not from behind. Beside him, slightly in front, where he could see her without having to turn his head. Whitmore, she said. Nothing. Whitmore. She kept her voice level, not loud, not soft. The tone you use when you need someone to hear their name is a specific thing, a signal. His head turned, very slowly. He looked at her. His eyes were open and tracking, but there was something behind them that was working through a different sequence than the present moment. She knew the look. She'd seen it from both directions. "It's Voss," she said. "You're at Camp Iron Ridge. It's a thunderstorm. You're on the range." He blinked. "You're okay," she said. Not as reassurance, not in the soft voice people use when they're managing someone fragile, just as a statement of what was true right now, in this specific location, in this weather. He looked at the range, then back at her. He started. "You don't have to explain it," she said. He closed his mouth. Another lightning strike. Closer this time, to the east, and the thunder came within 2 seconds. A cracking pressure that moved through the ground as much as through the air. Whitmore's body absorbed it the way a person absorbs unexpected impact, a full-body flinch that he didn't try to suppress. She didn't look at him when it happened. She looked downrange, giving him the dignity of not having his reaction witnessed directly. After a moment he said, "My boots are in the barracks." "Yeah," she said. "Let's go get them." She didn't touch him. She moved and he moved with her, and they walked back along the firing line through the rain at a pace that was unhurried without being slow, and she didn't say anything else until they reached the access road, where the packed surface was solid under their feet. And then she said, "You're doing well in the cycle." He didn't say anything. "Bench 3 was a good problem this morning. Your hold-off calculation on the second relay was right when most people were still adjusting." He looked at her sideways. She could feel it. "Why are you saying that?" he said. "Because it's true." He didn't answer. "What happened out there tonight doesn't come with a form," she said. "It doesn't go in a report. You were outside without authorization in a weather event. That's the note in the log. That's all." He exhaled. The rain was still coming hard, running off both of them in sheets. "This doesn't—" he started, then stopped. Tried again. "You don't have to," she said again. He walked. She walked. They reached the barracks door at the same moment. A long horizontal lightning stroke lit the entire valley, and in that brief flat illumination, Camp Iron Ridge looked like a photograph of itself. Every edge sharp, every surface wet and silver, the ridgeline to the north hard and black against the glowing cloud base. Whitmore opened the door, held it for a moment, looking at her. "Captain," he said. She looked at him. "Thank you," he said. She nodded once, and he went inside. She was standing under the narrow overhang outside the barracks entrance, out of the rain for the first time in 30 minutes, when Mercer's voice came on the cadre net. "All positions, this is command. Candidate Whitmore has been located. He's secure. Stand down search. Acknowledge by position." The positions acknowledged one by one. Then, "Voss, report your position." She keyed the radio. "Barracks 2 entrance." A pause. "Come to command post." The command post was a single room in the main building. Maps on the wall, radio equipment, a folding table with a status board, 2 chairs that had been there long enough to develop distinct personalities. Mercer was at the table. Thorne was at the radio. General Hale was against the far wall with his arms crossed, and that expression that gave nothing away. Elena came in dripping on the floor. Mercer looked at her for a long moment. "I told you to stand down," he said. "You did. And you went out anyway." Whitmore was at bench 8. He'd walked the range in his socks in a thunderstorm. He needed someone to talk him back. "My duty personnel were searching by sector, which was the right call. But I'd seen something in his reaction profile during combatives, and I knew where he'd go." She paused. "I was closer. I was already up, so I went." Mercer's jaw moved once. "You don't make unilateral decisions in my cycle," he said. "No," she said. "I don't. Tonight I did. If you need to note that in the evaluation file, note it." The room was quiet except for the rain on the roof and the low static of the radio. Mercer looked at Thorne. Thorne was looking at the status board. Hale, against the wall, hadn't moved. "Whitmore?" Mercer said. "He's in his rack," Elena said. "He's okay. He's going to be okay." Another silence. "Fine," Mercer said. It came out as two distinct syllables, and it was the closest thing to acknowledgement that a man like Mercer was likely to produce in a moment like this. "Go get dry." She turned and left. In the hallway out of the command post, she stopped for a moment against the wall. The building's fluorescent lighting was harsh after the dark of the range, and she closed her eyes for a second and let her body catch up to what it had been doing for the last 40 minutes. Her hands were cold, her boots were soaked through. She pushed off the wall and went to find dry socks. Hook. The storm broke at 0500. It ended the way summer mountain storms do. Not gradually, not by degree, but suddenly, the rain cutting off between one breath and the next. The cloud base lifting in visible layers. The first gray of pre-dawn light coming through and making the wet camp look rinsed and new and somehow smaller than it had been in the dark. By the time the morning brief assembled at 0530, everything on the surface looked the same as any other day. 30 candidates in folding chairs, coffee, the smell of floor wax, Mercer at the podium with his folder. The only difference was that nobody was talking. Not the normal pre-brief low conversation, the status checking, the equipment notes, the low-level social navigation that happened every morning in that room. Nobody was talking. They were sitting in their chairs, some of them looking at the floor, some at the wall, one or two exchanging glances in the careful way of people who have collectively decided to not yet say the thing they all know. Whitmore was in his seat in the second row. He was in clean uniform, sitting straight, no visible evidence of the night. But several candidates near him were sitting with the small distance that people keep when they're being respectful of something without naming it. Elena sat where she always sat. In the third row, slightly apart, hood up. The brief ran through the day's schedule. Mercer delivered it the same as always, same cadence, same structure, same economy of words. The day would open with a shooting assessment recap and move into an advanced wind reading problem that would occupy the morning. The afternoon was classified until the candidates were on the line. After the brief, as the candidates filed out toward the range, Maddox came alongside Elena in the hallway. He didn't say anything for a few steps. Then, "You went after him." "He was on the range," she said. "Mercer had the duty roster running." "Yeah." Another few steps. "What was he doing out there?" "Standing," she said. Maddox was quiet. "You've seen it before," he said. Not a question. "Yes," she said. He processed that. They pushed through the exterior door into the morning air, cold and washed clean from the storm. The ground still holding water in the low points, the grass along the perimeter flattened and dark. "Decker wants to say something to you," Maddox said. Elena looked straight ahead. "Tell him I'll be at bench 1 doing morning glass if he wants to talk," she said. Maddox nodded, went his direction. The morning assessment ran from 0630 to 900. The wind reading problem was exactly as difficult as the schedule suggested. The storm had reset the thermal baseline across the valley, which meant all the predictive models the candidates had built over the previous 2 days were partially invalid. The mirage pattern was different. The flag behavior was different. The way the air moved between the ridge lines had a different rhythm, and the only way to read it accurately was to watch it long enough to understand the new pattern, which required patience that the time pressure of the assessment actively worked against. Elena moved the line once, at the transition between the first and second relay, when she stopped behind Greer and watched him work through a 650-yard engagement with the controlled stillness of someone who'd learned from the previous day's problems. "You're reading the valley floor," she said. "Thermal off the ground," he said. "You adjusted for the storm reset?" "Yes, ma'am." "Show me your data." He passed the notebook without hesitation. She read it, looked at the range, looked at his numbers again. "Add half a minute right on the 450-yard target," she said. "Storm pushed the thermal column east. It'll read light until 1000. He made the adjustment. Shot. Steel rang. He looked over his shoulder. She was already gone. The crisis came at 0947. The assessment was in its final relay, the candidates working through the last sequence of targets, when the radio on Mercer's hip produced a sound that wasn't CadreNet traffic. It was a personal device, his secondary phone, the one with the restricted number that the camp used for command-level alerts from outside. He stepped away from the line. When he came back, his expression had changed. Thorne was beside him before the candidates noticed anything. "What?" Thorne said, very quietly. "Admiral Rhodes," Mercer said, equally quiet. "He's moving up his visit. He'll be here for the final evaluation day." Thorne stared at him. "That's tomorrow." "Yes." "We're scheduled for day 4. "I know." "Why?" Mercer's jaw tightened. "He's added this camp to a regional inspection circuit. We're now on the schedule." He paused. "He wants to observe the final precision assessment live." Thorne understood immediately. "The final assessment is built for day 4's conditions. We've had a weather event. The range will be reset this afternoon," Mercer said. "We'll run the final assessment tomorrow with whatever conditions we have." Thorne was quiet for a moment. "That's going to be harder for the candidates," he said. "Yes," Mercer said. "It is." He looked out at the line. The candidates working through their last relay, unaware that the timeline had just compressed by a day. His eyes moved down the line to the far end, to Elena. She was at bench 7, watching a candidate named Pollard work through a 900-yard engagement. Pollard was struggling. His dope chart was off from the storm reset, and he hadn't made the full correction. Elena said something. Pollard made an adjustment. Shot. Missed by 18 inches to the left. Elena said something else. Pollard made another adjustment. Shot. The steel rang. Mercer watched for a moment longer than he intended. Then he turned back to the command post. He found Hale at the coffee station in the main building at 10:30, after the morning assessment had been called and candidates were in the break period. "Rhodes is coming tomorrow," Mercer said. Hale didn't look surprised. "I heard." "You heard from who?" "Forsyth saw the amended schedule," Hale said. He was filling a cup from the carafe on the table, his back partially to Mercer, his voice neutral. "Rhodes has been doing a circuit of evaluation facilities this quarter. I knew he might include Iron Ridge." "You knew." "I thought it was possible." Mercer crossed his arms. "You should have told me that was a possibility." Hale turned around. He looked at Mercer with a directness that wasn't confrontational, but wasn't soft either. "Would it have changed your preparation?" he said. Mercer thought about it. "No." "Then it wouldn't have mattered." "It would have given me time." "Time to do what?" Hale said. "You're running a good cycle. Your candidates are performing. Your evaluator is producing solid work." He paused on the last word. "What time do you actually need?" Mercer uncrossed his arms. "What does Rhodes know about Voss?" Hale looked at his coffee cup. "Hale," Mercer said. "Admiral Rhodes," Hale said carefully, "has a historical awareness of certain classified programs and the personnel attached to them. Whether he's aware of Captain Voss's specific assignments is not something I can confirm or deny." "That's not an answer." "It's the answer I have." Mercer stared at him. "Is tomorrow going to be a problem?" Hale looked up from his coffee. "No," he said, with a certainty that was entirely too specific to be generic reassurance. "Tomorrow is not going to be a problem." The afternoon block was weapons maintenance and an academic debrief on the morning's wind reading results. Mercer delivered the data himself, walking through the scoring matrix candidate by candidate, the corrections that worked and the corrections that didn't, the pattern in the errors that would tell a thoughtful shooter something about what needed to change. He did not use Elena's name when he referenced the corrections that had produced the best results. He referred to Evaluator guidance and left it there. Several candidates glanced toward the back of the room where Elena was sitting. She didn't look up. After the academic block, Mercer announced that Admiral Rhodes would observe the final assessment the following morning, moved up from the original schedule, and that all personnel should be in position and prepared by 0700. The room's energy changed in a way that was difficult to precisely name. Not quite anxiety, not quite excitement. The specific alertness that comes from knowing that the audience for your performance has just increased in significance. Maddox, in the third row, looked at the back of the room. Elena was reviewing her notebook. He turned back to the front and said nothing. That evening, after dinner, after the camp had settled into its pre-lights-out routine, Decker found Elena at the water station outside the mess hall. He stood there for a moment with his hands in his jacket pockets, like someone who'd rehearsed what they were going to say, and now found that the rehearsal hadn't been useful. Elena was filling her bottle. She didn't make it harder by looking at him. Finally, he said, "Last night." "Yeah," she said. "When you went after Whitmore?" "Yeah." Another pause. "I've been deployed with guys who had the same—" he started, then stopped. "I know what that looks like, the night walking." She didn't say anything. "I should have—" He stopped again, tried something different. "I was out of line, the mat stuff, the tattoo, all of it." He said it without the particular tone of a man performing apology. He said it like a man reading a fact from a document. "I was wrong." Elena capped her water bottle. "You weren't the only one," she said. "I know, but I was the loudest." She looked at him for a moment. "Apology received," she said. He nodded, looked like he might say something else, decided against it. He went back inside. She stood in the dark outside the mess hall for a minute, the water bottle in her hand, looking at the ridgeline to the north. The storm had cleared the sky completely, and the stars were extremely bright and extremely far away in the way they get at altitude, and the ridgeline was a clean black edge against them. She touched the back of her neck, not the coordinates themselves, the skin above them. She exhaled slowly through her nose. She went inside. Hot. At 0650 the following morning, Admiral Nathan Rhodes's vehicles came through the main gate at Camp Iron Ridge, 2 black SUVs and a staff car, small for a 4-stars movement but appropriate for an informal inspection circuit. His aide-de-camp was a commander named Park, who moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been managing a senior officer's schedule for long enough to anticipate rather than react. Rhodes himself was 61, trim in his service dress uniform, with the quality of stillness that accumulates in men who have made enough consequential decisions that they have stopped being performed by them. He was not what movies suggested admirals look like. He was quiet. He listened more than he spoke. His eyes moved across a room with the particular attentiveness of someone reading a situation rather than preparing to perform within it. He greeted Mercer with a handshake and a direct question about the cycle's performance metrics. He greeted Thorne by name. He acknowledged Hale with a brief nod that contained a history Mercer wasn't privy to. Then his eyes moved across the assembled personnel on the firing line, down the row of candidates, and stopped. Elena was at bench 1, adjusting the parallax on her optic for the morning conditions. Her hood was up. She was doing what she always did, methodically, without looking at the visiting party. Rhodes's expression didn't change, but he stopped moving for approximately 2 seconds in a way that a man like Rhodes, who had been in motion functionally for his entire adult life, did not usually stop. Park said something to him in a low voice. Rhodes didn't answer. He started walking again toward the command post. Mercer fell into step beside him and began the briefing summary. Rhodes listened, asked 2 sharp questions about the storm reset protocols and candidate performance variance across weather conditions. Mercer answered. They reached the command post. Rhodes paused at the doorway and looked back at the line. Elena was still at bench 1. She'd finished the parallax adjustment and was now doing something with her data log, writing in that small, even hand. "Who's that?" Rhodes said. "Evaluator, sir," Mercer said. "Captain Elena Voss. Precision marksmanship and tactical observation." Rhodes said nothing. "She came with a recommendation from General Whitmore's office," Mercer said. "I know," Rhodes said very quietly. Then, "Have her on the line for the final assessment." "She's already scheduled, sir." "Good," Rhodes said. He went inside the command post. Mercer stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the line. Then he looked at Hale, who was standing slightly behind him and slightly to the right, and Hale's face was doing something that Mercer had not seen on it in 3 days, something that was not quite controlled, something that was waiting for what was going to happen the way a man waits for a fuse he lit to find the charge. "Hale," Mercer said. "Yes," Hale said. "What is going to happen today?" Hale looked at the line. "At Elena." "The best shot you've seen on this range," he said, "in this cycle or any other." He walked past Mercer into the command post. Mercer stood alone in the doorway. The morning air off the valley was cold and clean and carried the smell of the storm's aftermath. Wet rock, wet grass, the mineral sharpness of damp soil drying in the early sun. Down the line, Elena closed her data log. She looked downrange. She didn't look at the command post. She didn't look at the visiting party. She looked at the steel targets in the distance, small and still in the morning light, and her expression was the same expression it always was. Level, contained, giving nothing away. Except that something in her posture had shifted, some quality of readiness that was different from evaluation mode readiness, that was older and more specific than that. And Maddox, who happened to be looking at her from bench 3, noticed it and couldn't have said exactly what it was, except that it made the back of his neck feel the way the air feels before lightning. He turned back to his own bench. He checked his action. He did not know what was coming, but he was starting to understand that whatever it was, he was going to remember it. The final assessment brief ran 7 minutes. Mercer delivered it from the command post doorway with Admiral Rhodes standing to his left and Hale to his right, and the 31 candidates arranged in a loose arc on the range apron in the morning cold. The brief covered the assessment parameters, a 4-stage precision engagement sequence, targets at 300, 600, 800, and 940 yards, each stage with its own time window and its own environmental variable that the candidates would have to read and apply without assistance. No evaluator corrections during the assessment, no coaching, no data sharing between candidates. Each shooter worked his own problem, logged his own data, lived with his own results. The evaluation file would close at end of day. Selections for program advancement would be communicated within 72 hours. Mercer looked at the candidates when he said that. Let it land. Questions? He said. Nobody spoke. 0700, he said. First relay on the line. The candidates moved. Yes. The first 2 stages ran cleanly. The morning air was cold enough that barrel heating wasn't a factor yet, and the thermal column off the valley floor was minimal, which made the wind reading problem on the 600-yard stage more honest than it would have been an hour later. Candidates worked through their sequences with the focused economy of people who understood that today was the day everything they'd done for the last 3 days either added up to something or didn't. Admiral Rhodes watched from the command platform, a raised wooden deck behind the firing line with a clear sight line to the steel and a radio-connected status display that showed the scoring in real time. He watched with a spotting scope and said nothing. Park stood behind him making occasional notes. Hale was beside Rhodes, and the two of them spoke in low voices twice during the second stage, exchanges too short to carry. Mercer ran the line. Elena was at the far end of the observation position, off to the right of the scoring table, doing what she'd been doing for 3 days, watching, writing, building a record of what was happening at each bench and why. She had a spotting scope too, a smaller one than Rhodes's setup, and she moved it methodically from bench to bench between shots. The third stage opened at 0850, 800 yards. The wind off the valley had shifted since the brief, not dramatically but meaningfully, a 3 to 4 knot clockwise rotation that changed the effective crosswind component on the 800-yard line from what most of the candidates had been expecting based on the morning's early readings. The kind of shift that required real-time adjustment, which was the point, which was why the third stage always got harder than the second. The first 6 candidates in the relay worked through their sequences. 3 hits, 2 misses, 1 hit on a retry that would cost scoring points but proved the adjustment could be found. Then Commander Mercer stepped onto the line. This was part of the program. Evaluators and cadre participated in the final assessment demonstration sequence to establish a scored baseline against which candidates were measured. It was tradition, and it served a real purpose, and Mercer was good enough to make it meaningful rather than symbolic. He'd been one of the top-scoring shooters in his own selection cycle a decade ago, and his fundamentals had stayed sharp. He set up at the demonstration bench, checked his data log, applied his wind call. He settled into his firing position. He pressed the trigger. The bolt cycled. Nothing happened. Not a miss. Nothing. The rifle hadn't fired. He worked the bolt, checked the feed, tried again. The trigger broke, but the firing pin didn't fall. A dead primer, or a striker issue, or something in the fire control group that had decided at 0857 on the final assessment day with a 4-star Admiral watching from the platform to stop functioning. He worked the bolt twice more. Nothing. The range went quiet in the specific way it goes quiet when something has gone wrong in front of people who are professionally invested in things not going wrong. Rhodes lowered his spotting scope. Mercer looked at the rifle. He kept his expression where it needed to be, which took something, because what he was feeling was not suitable for the demonstration position with 31 candidates watching and an admiral on the platform. He cleared the weapon and stepped back from the bench. "We'll pause for a function check," he said. His voice was level, professional. It gave nothing away. He set the rifle on the bench and began a systematic disassembly sequence, checking the bolt face, the firing pin, the extractor, working through it with the calm attention of a man who knew exactly what he was looking for, which is the only useful way to troubleshoot anything. But it was taking time, and time was the one thing the assessment schedule didn't have flexibility on, and everyone on the line knew it. Park, on the platform, was already leaning toward his communications device. The Admiral's schedule was compressed. If the demonstration sequence ran long, the downstream blocks would be affected. Rhodes said nothing. Hale said nothing. Then there was movement at the far end of the observation position. Elena set down her spotting scope. She walked to the demonstration bench. She didn't ask permission. She didn't announce herself. She looked at the disassembled components on the bench, at Mercer's hands, at the bolt group he was holding. "Let me see the firing pin assembly," she said. Mercer looked at her. In that moment, a fraction of a second, not long enough to measure, something moved behind his eyes. Not irritation, not exactly. More like a man experiencing two competing reflexes simultaneously and choosing between them faster than the choice felt comfortable. He handed her the firing pin assembly. She turned it over. She looked at the retaining pin. She pressed it with her thumbnail and it moved fractionally. Not the way it should move, not the spring-loaded resistance of a properly seated component, but the slight wrong direction play of something that had backed out under repeated cycling. "Retaining pins walked," she said. "Lost spring tension. Firing pin can't travel full distance." Mercer leaned in and looked at where her thumb was. "Got a punch?" she said. He reached into his vest pocket and produced a 3/16 roll pin punch, because he was Ryan Mercer, and he carried a roll pin punch in his vest pocket the way some people carried their phones, habitually, without thinking about it anymore. She took it. The fix took 40 seconds. Reseat the retaining pin, confirm spring tension with 2 thumb checks, reassemble the bolt group, function check the striker travel with the bolt out of the receiver. Clean fall. Consistent. She reinstalled the bolt, cycled it twice to verify, handed the rifle back. Mercer took it. He looked at it. Cycled it once himself. "Thank you," he said. It came out as 2 specific syllables, the same way Maddox's thank you on day 2 had come out. Something genuine wearing the clothes of something ordinary. Elena nodded once and stepped back, but she didn't return to the observation position. She stood at the demonstration bench. Mercer was looking at her. She was looking at the range. "Captain," he said quietly enough that it didn't carry to the candidates. She looked at him. He looked at the rifle in his hands, then at her, then at the range. He set the rifle on the bench. He took one step back. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was a small, specific, physical thing. The space that opened up when a man stepped back from something he'd been holding. It meant whatever it meant, and he didn't accompany it with words. Elena looked at the rifle on the bench. She looked at the 940-yard target at the far end of the range. A 12-inch steel circle on a painted red stand, small enough at that distance to look like a thumbtack from where they stood. She looked at the platform where Admiral Rhodes was standing with the spotting scope halfway raised, watching. She reached up, and she took her hood down. It was the first time in 4 days that she'd done it, and what it did to the range was not nothing. The candidates who were watching, and by this point all of them were watching, saw a face they'd been projecting assumptions onto for 4 days, and whatever they'd been projecting, reality was specific and different in the way reality always is. She was 34 years old. She had a scar along the left side of her jaw, thin and old. She had dark eyes that didn't perform anything. The tattoo on the back of her neck was now fully visible in the morning light. Grid coordinates, small and precise, in a military format, just above the collar line. She picked up the rifle. She looked through the scope, made one adjustment to the parallax, read the wind off the thermal shimmer above the valley floor. Didn't use a flag. Didn't consult her data log. She breathed once, slowly, and the exhale ran all the way out, and then she was still in that particular way she'd been still since the first morning. Not empty, just finished with everything that wasn't this. She pressed the trigger. The rifle fired. 1 second, 2. The sound came back from 940 yards like someone striking an anvil in a quiet room, a clean, hard clang that carried across the entire range and didn't fade so much as finish. A sound with a defined edge. The steel target swung on its mount and settled. Nobody on the range said anything. Rhodes had the spotting scope at his eye. He held it there for a moment after the shot. Then he lowered it, very slowly. His face had changed, not dramatically. A small change. The kind of change that happens when a person sees something they'd been told about once, years ago, and had not fully believed until now. He said 2 words. They were quiet. Quiet enough that only Park, standing immediately behind him, and Hale, standing to his left, heard them clearly. "Shadow 9, Rhodes said. Hale looked at him. Rhodes was already walking off the platform. He came down the 3 steps from the platform and crossed the range apron with the deliberate pace of a man who knew exactly where he was going and had decided some things about how to get there. Park fell into step behind him automatically, then stopped when Rhodes didn't slow down, because the direction he was walking didn't have room for aids. He walked to the demonstration bench. Elena had set the rifle down. She was standing beside it, not looking at the platform, not tracking his approach. She was doing the same thing she'd been doing all week, standing in whatever space she occupied and simply being there, without performance, without management. Rhodes stopped in front of her. He was 6 feet from her. She looked at him. They looked at each other for a moment that was longer than a moment. There was a history in it that nobody on the range had access to except the 3 people who shared it, Rhodes, Hale, and the woman standing in front of them. And it was not a comfortable history, not the kind that arrives with warmth, but the kind that arrives with weight. Rhodes came to attention, and he saluted her. A formal, full military salute, arm at the precise angle, held long enough that it couldn't be mistaken for anything other than what it was. Not casual acknowledgement, not a gesture, but a specific, deliberate act. Elena looked at him. She did not immediately return it, not because she was refusing it, because she was visibly, physically processing something that she hadn't expected, a fullness in the chest that came up faster than she could contain it, and she pressed it down in the way that people press things down when they are not going to do that here, not in front of 31 candidates and a full-range cadre. She returned the salute. Rhodes lowered his arm. "Shadow 9, he said. Not the same way he'd said it on the platform. That had been recognition, private, involuntary. This was something else. A naming, an acknowledgement made in front of witnesses. Behind her, she heard the range go very quiet. "Sir," she said. "You look different without the hood," he said. "I've been told that," she said. Something at the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, the trace of one. "Walk with me," he said. They walked to the far end of the range apron, beyond the candidates, beyond the scoring table, to the edge of the cleared ground where the berm dropped off toward the valley. The grass there was still wet from the storm. The morning light was full now, the sun above the eastern ridge, the valley below green and bright. Rhodes stood with his hands behind his back, looking at the valley. "How long have you been here?" he said. 4 days, she said. "How many people have figured out who you are?" Hale knew when he arrived. Mercer knows enough. The candidates. She paused. They know something. They don't know what. Rhodes nodded. "Whitmore," he said. She looked at him. "Park briefed me on the overnight incident," he said. "Storm, candidate off post, unauthorized personnel response." He paused. "Unauthorized by the duty roster. Not by any measure I'd apply." She was quiet. "How was he this morning?" Rhodes said. "On the line at 0625, she said. "First candidate ready." Rhodes exhaled through his nose, something that was almost a quiet expression of something, pressed down before it became audible. "I want to tell you something," he said. "And I want to say it here, before we go back, and I have to be an admiral again, and you have to be an evaluator." She waited. "I knew your father," he said. "Not well. We served together briefly early in my career before either of us was what we ended up becoming." He looked at the valley. He was the kind of man who made other people better at everything just by being in the same room. The kind of man who made you feel like being ordinary was a choice you were actively making. She didn't speak. "What he did on that ridge," Rhodes said. "What he chose." He stopped. "I was not there. I know the record. I've read the reports that exist and thought about the reports that don't. And I've carried for 12 years something I want to say to you, which is that what he did was not a sacrifice made in a vacuum. It was a decision made by a man who trusted the person beside him to carry what came after." The wind moved through the wet grass below the berm. "He was right to trust her," Rhodes said. Elena stood very still. She was looking at the valley floor. Her jaw was set with the particular tension of someone who is deciding whether they are going to be able to stay in the container they've built. She stayed in it. "Thank you," she said. It came out quieter than she expected. Rhodes turned from the valley. "Now," he said, in a different register entirely, the one that was responsible for decisions and answerable to them. "Tell me about this cycle. Tell me what you've seen." They walked back along the range apron, and Elena told him. Not everything, not the personal material, not the first morning's laughter, or the training bay mat, or the barracks hallway conversation with Decker. The professional material, candidate performance, technical strengths and gaps, the specific adjustments that had worked and the ones that hadn't, her assessment of who was ready for advanced selection and who needed another cycle. Rhodes listened the way he'd watched the range, with the full specific attention of someone for whom listening was a professional skill. "Maddox," he said at one point. "He's ready," she said. "He was ready before he got here. He's carrying some habits from 8 years of doing things well enough that the habits feel like technique. Once he unlocks that," she paused, "he's going to be very good." "He was the one who started the tattoo commentary," Rhodes said. She looked at him. "Park," he said simply. "Park needs a different job," she said. Something at his mouth moved again. "Duly noted." They reached the scoring table. The third stage had resumed behind them. Candidates back on the line, the assessment running, Mercer managing the relay with Thorne. Mercer watched Rhodes and Elena walk back from the berm. His expression was its controlled professional surface, but Thorne, beside him, could read Mercer the way you read terrain you've crossed before. "He told her something," Thorne said, very low. "Yeah," Mercer said. "About her background?" "I don't know." Thorne was quiet. "Sir," Mercer looked at him. "That shot," Thorne said. 940 yards, 1 round, storm reset conditions." "Yeah," Mercer said. "I've been running these cycles for 3 years, Thorne said. "I've never seen that shot." Mercer looked at the range. "No," he said. "Neither have I." The after-action debrief ran from 1100 to 1230 in the main classroom, the same room where Forsyth had clicked through the wrong slide 4 days ago and Hale had gone still at the back wall. All 31 candidates. Mercer at the front. Rhodes seated to the right of the doorway. Hale beside him. Elena in the second row, hood down, the same bench she'd occupied since the first day, except that now the other candidates had closed the distance. The chairs on either side of her were occupied for the first time. Mercer worked through the assessment results with the precision and lack of sentiment that defined everything he did. Individual scores, aggregate performance by stage, the technical breakdown of what the wind shift in Stage 3 had revealed about each candidate's adaptability. He was direct and specific, which was the only useful way to run a debrief. When he reached Stage 4, the 940-yard demonstration shot, he paused. He looked at his papers. Then he looked up. The demonstration for Stage 4 was conducted by our evaluator, Captain Voss, he said. The shot produced a confirmed hit at 940 yards under post-storm thermal conditions with a variable 4 to 7 knot crosswind. 1 round. He paused. I want you to understand what that means technically. The ballistic drop at 940 in those conditions exceeds 42 feet. The wind drift on a 10-second flight time in a variable crosswind is not calculable to a precise figure. It requires a read, a real-time environmental assessment that is based on pattern recognition developed over years of specific practice. You cannot calculate your way to that shot. You have to have done the work long enough that the calculation becomes intuition. He set his papers down. I've been on ranges for 15 years, he said. I've seen very good shooting. What happened this morning was in a different category. He paused. I want that in your heads when you're thinking about what advanced training is for. The room was quiet. Nobody looked at Elena directly. They were looking at the front, or at their notes, or at the middle distance. The specific attention of people who are listening hard enough that they're not watching anymore. Maddox was looking at his hands. After a moment, Mercer said, "Questions on results?" Greer raised his hand and asked a technical question about the Stage 3 scoring matrix. Mercer answered it. 2 more technical questions followed. The room began to breathe normally again. Then Maddox raised his hand. Mercer acknowledged him. Maddox didn't ask a technical question. He said, "I want to say something." Mercer waited. "To Captain Voss," Maddox said. The room adjusted. Maddox looked at Elena. He wasn't performing it. His voice was level, and his face was doing the thing faces do when the person behind them has decided that something is going to be said, and the manner in which it's said is secondary. "I was wrong," he said. "On the first day. The tattoo, the comments, all of it. I was wrong, and it was a poor showing, and I want to say that in this room." Elena looked at him. "I also want to say," Maddox continued, "that you're the best shooter I've ever watched work, and I've watched some good shooters work." He stopped there. His jaw moved once. Then he sat back and looked at the front of the room. Done. The statement made. The room stayed quiet. Elena looked at him for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. "Bench 3, she said. 2 MOA right." He looked at her. "That's still the adjustment you need to make on your dope chart," she said. "It's been consistent all week." His mouth opened. Then he laughed. Not the kind of laughter from the first morning, something smaller and more human. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Several people in the room smiled. Not all of them. Some of them were still working through something that hadn't finished arriving yet. Rhodes, by the doorway, looked at the floor. After the debrief, in the hallway, Mercer found Elena at the water station. He stood beside her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then he said, "I owe you an apology." "No, you don't," she said. "I do. I questioned your assignment to this cycle based on—" He stopped. "Based on nothing except a memo I didn't trust and a set of assumptions about what an evaluator looks like." "You run a selection cycle," she said. "You need to know who's in it. That's not an assumption. That's your job." "I handled it poorly." "You handled it the way most commanders would." She filled the bottle, capped it. "You got better." He looked at her. Something in his face moved. "That's a generous read," he said. "It's an accurate one," she said. "There's a difference." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Rhodes is going to want to read your full evaluator report." "I know. It'll be ready before he leaves." "He's also—" Mercer paused. "He said something to me. Before the debrief. He said that this cycle is going to be referenced in the program's development training going forward." He looked at her. "The demonstration shot. He wants it documented." Elena was quiet. "One shot," Mercer said. "It's just a shot," she said. "It isn't," he said, "and you know that." She looked at the hallway, the institutional walls, the fluorescent light, the scuffed linoleum that had been here longer than any of the people walking on it. "Document what helps people," she said. "The rest is administrative." She picked up her water bottle and walked back toward the classroom. Rhodes found Hale at the vehicles at 1300, when the morning block had officially closed and the camp was at midday stand-down. Hale was leaning against the lead SUV with his jacket open and his coffee cup empty, looking at the ridgeline. "You should have told me she was here," Rhodes said. "You would have come earlier," Hale said. "Yes." "And the cycle would have been about you coming early," Hale said, instead of about her doing her job. Rhodes looked at him. She needed 4 days of this, Hale said. Not the respect. She doesn't need the respect. She needed 4 days of doing the work, of seeing that she could still stand somewhere and make something better than it was before she arrived. He paused. She came off 2 years of isolated operational assignment. You know what that does to a person. They need to be reminded that the work has a product they can watch. Rhodes was quiet for a long moment. The tattoo, he said. She had it done 6 months after she came home, Hale said. She told me once that she needed to be able to touch it, the coordinates. She said that some days it's the only thing that makes the geography feel real. Rhodes set his empty cup on the hood of the vehicle. She should be running a training pipeline, he said, not processing paper in an evaluator pool. Tell her that, Hale said. She'll do what she decides to do. Will she listen? Hale looked at him. She always listens, he said. She's very selective about what she does with what she hears. Rhodes picked up his cup again, found it empty again, set it down again. Marcus, he said. Hale looked at him. When the time comes, Rhodes said, when she's ready for the next assignment, whatever that looks like, I want to be in the room. Hale nodded. She'll probably run it better than both of us, he said. Probably, Rhodes said. He took his empty cup and walked toward the mess hall because 4-star admirals needed coffee the same as everyone else, and the morning had been long, and there was still an afternoon to get through. Hale watched him go. Then he looked at the ridgeline to the north, the clean black edge of it against the afternoon sky, the same edge that had been there before any of them arrived, and would be there after all of them were gone. He touched the outside of his jacket pocket, where he kept his phone, where a photograph was stored that he had looked at exactly once in 12 years and had not deleted. A ridgeline. A figure. A set of coordinates in the corner that matched the ink on the back of a neck he'd watched this week carry everything it had always carried, without complaint, without performance, in a place where nobody knew what it meant. Until now. He pushed off the vehicle and went inside. The mess hall coffee was terrible, the same as it had been every morning since the cycle started, and Hale poured himself a cup anyway and stood at the end of the serving line and drank half of it before it cooled enough to taste, which was the only strategy that worked with institutional coffee. Get it down before your mouth registered what it was. The room was half full. Candidates at the long tables, most of them eating with the focused silence of people who'd been running on reserve for 4 days and were now in the specific aftermath of sustained high-performance output, the flatness that comes when the pressure finally lifts and the body doesn't know what to do with the absence. Some of them were talking, low and scattered. Some were just eating. A few had phones out for the first time in days, scrolling with the slightly stunned expression of people re-entering a world they'd briefly left. Elena was at the far end of the room at a corner table with a tray she was mostly ignoring and her notebook open beside it. Hale carried his coffee across the room and sat down across from her. She looked up. He sat there for a moment without saying anything, which was how he started most of the conversations he'd had with her over the years. Not as a tactic, just as his natural rhythm. The pause before the thing he actually wanted to say. "How are you?" he said. She looked at him. It was a real question from him, and she knew it, not the social version of it. "I'm okay," she said. "That's not what I asked." She set down her pen. She looked at the room for a moment, the candidates at the tables, the sound of trays and low conversation, the institutional sameness of the space. "I'm better than I was 3 weeks ago," she said. "That's the most accurate answer I can give." Hale nodded. He drank his coffee. "Rhodes wants to put you in front of a pipeline," he said. He mentioned it. "What did you say?" "I told him I'd think about it." Hale set his cup down. "Elena." "I know," she said. "You've been thinking about it for 2 years." "I've been doing other things for 2 years," she said. "Thinking happened in the margins." He looked at her. She looked back. The particular look between two people who have been honest with each other long enough that they've given up on softening things. "This week changed something," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," she said. "It did." "What changed?" She looked at the room again. At Maddox 2 tables over, eating with the focused efficiency that he brought to everything. The same man who'd laughed on the first morning and apologized in a debrief and asked a technical question about his own dope chart as an act of something close to contrition. At Whitmore, sitting straight, eating, present. At Greer and Santos and Okafor and all the others who'd been difficult and stubborn and genuinely skilled and occasionally exactly right about things she hadn't expected them to be right about. I forgot, she said, that you can watch the work produce something, that there's a version of this where you say a thing and then you watch it happen in front of you and it's not abstract. She paused. The last 2 years, everything was abstract. I did things, and the results were somewhere downstream, and I never saw them. I never saw what it produced. She picked up her pen, didn't write anything, set it back down. This week I said something and people hit steel. That's not a small thing. Hale looked at her for a long time. Your father, he said, used to say that the measure of what you know is what you can transfer. She looked at her tray. I know, she said. He was right. He was right about most things. A pause. It was annoying. Hale almost smiled. Yes, he said. It was. They sat for a moment in the comfortable silence of people who share grief that's had enough time to become something more complex than grief. Not less, just more layered, the way anything becomes layered when you carry it long enough. Then Elena said, Tell me what the pipeline would look like, Shad. Rhodes's vehicles were scheduled to leave at 1500. Before they did, he sat for 40 minutes in the command post with Mercer, reviewing the evaluation file that Elena had completed over the course of the morning, a 30-page document that covered every candidate in the cycle with the specific, unsentimental clarity of someone who had been watching carefully and had a precise vocabulary for what she'd seen. Rhodes read in silence. He turned pages at a consistent pace, not rushing, not lingering. Mercer sat across from him and did not talk. When Rhodes finished, he set the document on the table and was quiet for a moment. This is the best candidate evaluation I've read in 4 years, he said. Mercer said nothing. Not the best from a field evaluator. The best I've read, period, including pipeline-assigned instructors and senior assessment officers. He tapped the document. She sees things, and she writes what she sees without editorial inflation or defensive hedging. That's rarer than the shooting. I know, Mercer said. Rhodes looked at him. You know now, Rhodes said. Not cruel, just specific. Mercer absorbed that. Yes, he said, I know now. Rhodes straightened the document. I'm going to recommend her for lead instructor, advanced marksmanship pipeline, with a secondary mandate covering candidate assessment methodology. That's a permanent post, stateside, working with the next generation of selection candidates. Will she take it? Mercer said. She'll take it, Rhodes said. She's already decided. I saw it in her face when she handed me this document. Mercer looked at the file. At the 30 pages of careful, precise work that had been produced by a woman he'd questioned and then watched, and then, incrementally, understood. Sir, he said. Rhodes looked at him. I'd like to write a supplemental observation for her file, Mercer said, from the cycle commander's position. Rhodes studied him for a moment. Write it, he said. Geb, the formal recognition happened at 1400, in the open ground between the main building and the range. Not a ceremony exactly, because Camp Iron Ridge didn't do ceremonies the way dress installations did them. There was no podium, no prepared remarks, no musicians. There was the camp assembled in a loose formation, Rhodes in his service dress and Hale beside him, and Mercer to the right with the evaluation cadre. Elena stood in front of them in her multicam, hood down. Rhodes read a brief citation. It was 2 paragraphs, which was short for what it was trying to convey, but the 2 paragraphs were exact. They named what she'd done during the cycle without inflating it, and they named, in the careful language of official recognition, the historical basis for the call sign that Rhodes had set on the range platform that morning. Shadow 9. The citation didn't give operational details. It couldn't. What it gave was the shape of the thing, a classified overseas evacuation, a mountain position held alone under extended hostile pressure, an adoptive father who had died making a decision that had protected dozens of people and had left behind a daughter who had carried that decision forward into everything she'd done since. When he finished reading, Rhodes produced a medal from a small case that Park had been holding. He pinned it to Elena's uniform. She stood straight through it. Her face was controlled. The jaw set the way it had been set when he'd told her what he'd told her earlier by the valley berm, the container doing its work. After Rhodes pinned it, he stepped back. He looked at her. "Shadow 9, he said one more time. "The way you say a name to give it back to someone who's been carrying it alone." She held his look. Then she reached up, unclipped the medal from her uniform, and put it in her left breast pocket. A murmur moved through the assembled candidates. Rhodes watched her. "Pocket?" he said. "I know where it is," she said. "That's enough." He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded. The formation broke at 14:20. Rhodes's vehicles were at the gate by 14:50. The aide-de-camp Park running through the departure checklist with the practiced efficiency that was his contribution to the 4-star's daily functioning. Before he got in the vehicle, Rhodes stopped beside Hale. "You're staying another day?" Rhodes said. "Tomorrow morning," Hale said. "I want to see the selections posted." "You know what the selections are going to be?" "I know what I'd select," Hale said. "I want to see if Mercer and I agree." Rhodes almost smiled. "And if you don't?" "Then one of us is wrong," Hale said. "Probably me. Mercer knows his candidates." Rhodes got in the vehicle. Through the window, he looked at the camp. The range, the barracks, the ridgeline above, the valley below. A small facility, unremarkable from the outside, doing the unglamorous necessary work of producing people who would eventually be trusted with consequential things in difficult places. The vehicle moved. Hale watched it go. Deschamps. The candidate's final administrative block ran from 1500 to 1700. Individual counseling sessions with the cycle cadre, each candidate getting 30 minutes of direct feedback on their performance and a preliminary sense of the evaluation outcome before the official selections were communicated. Elena was not required to conduct counseling sessions. That was cadre function. Mercer gave her the option anyway. "You don't have to," he said, "but if you want the time with them, I'll put you on the schedule." "How many?" she said. "All 31, if you're willing." She looked at him. "That's 6 hours," she said. "I know." She looked at the schedule on the table between them. "Start at 15:30, she said. "Give me the ones who struggled first." The sessions ran long, not because she talked too much. She didn't. She listened, which was more than most people expected from a formal counseling session, and the listening made the candidates talk more than they planned to, which made the sessions run longer than 30 minutes. Whitmore was first. He sat across from her in the small office Mercer had allocated. 2 chairs, a table, a window that looked at the side of the barracks building, and he had the careful posture of someone who had decided to behave as if last night hadn't happened and was not sure whether that was the right decision. She let him sit with that for a moment. Then, "You know what I'm going to say about the storm?" He looked at his hands. "That it goes in the report." "It doesn't go in the report," she said. He looked up. "I told you that already," she said. "I meant it. What goes in the report is your performance over 4 days, which is strong. Your wind reading showed the most consistent improvement of any candidate in this cycle. Your stage 3 score was 3rd highest." He was quiet. "What I'm going to say about the storm," she said, "is separate from the report. It's between you and me, and it's this. There's a form you haven't filed. From the 82nd rotation. The referral that got closed without follow-up." His jaw moved. "File it," she said. "Not because it affects your selection. It doesn't. Because you went outside barefoot in a thunderstorm and stood at a firing bench for an unknown period of time, and you deserve the support that prevents that from happening somewhere less manageable." She paused. "That's not a counseling note. That's one person telling another person to do the work." He was quiet for a long moment. "You know about the referral," he said. "I read eval files carefully," she said. "Does Mercer?" "That's between you and Mercer," she said. "And whoever you file it with. It doesn't go further than that from me." He looked at the table. "Okay," he said. It was a small word for a large decision. She didn't make it bigger than it was. "Good," she said. Stage 4. Walk me through your wind call. And they talked about shooting for the next 20 minutes, which was exactly what both of them needed. Maddox came in near the end, fifth from last. He sat down with the slightly uncomfortable energy of someone who'd already said the important thing publicly and wasn't sure what was left. Elena looked at his file, made a notation, looked up. "You're selected," she said. He exhaled, not dramatically, just the exhale that happens when something you've been holding releases. "Conditional?" he said. "Not conditional," she said. "Full selection. You've got the fundamentals and you've got the instinct. The habit problem on the bolt speed is correctable with dry fire work, which you know how to do." He nodded. She looked at the file again, then she set it down. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He looked at her. "The first morning," she said. "The tattoo. What were you actually thinking?" He was quiet for a moment. "Honestly?" "Yeah." He looked at the wall. "I was thinking that I'd been working for 8 years to be in that room and somebody had gotten there by a route I couldn't see and that felt—" He stopped. "It felt like something I didn't have the information to evaluate, so I evaluated what I could see, which was the tattoo." He paused, "Which was stupid." "It was a natural response to incomplete information," she said. "A natural response can still be wrong," he said. "Yes," she said. "It can." He looked at her. "Is that what you tell yourself about how you got treated this week?" She looked back at him. It was a real question, not a challenge. "I tell myself that people respond to what they can see," she said. "And that the answer to that isn't to argue, it's to show." He was quiet. "You showed," he said. "So did you," she said. "That's the thing. You showed something harder than shooting. You showed that you could be wrong about something and say so in front of people who respected you." He looked at his hands. "That's not a small thing either," she said. He sat there for a moment. Then he stood up, because the session was over and both of them knew it. At the door he stopped. "For what it's worth," he said. "The coordinates." He paused. "I looked up the region, not the specific grid, just the region. I know what happened there." He looked at her. "I'm sorry for all of it." She looked at him. "I know," she said. He nodded, once, and left. Matt. The last session ended at 21:30. The camp was quiet. The generators running their constant background note, the perimeter lighting on, the barracks dark except for a few windows showing the pale glow of phones or laptops. The range was invisible at this hour, just an absence of structure against the ridgeline. Elena sat alone in the small office after the last candidate left and did not move for a while. She wasn't processing anything specific. She was just sitting in the silence and letting the day be done. After a while, she picked up her notebook and opened it to the last page she'd written on. Her notes from the final stage of the assessment, the wind readings, the candidate responses. She looked at the numbers. She closed the notebook. She reached up and touched the back of her neck. The coordinates were there. They were always there. The skin over them slightly raised where the ink sat deep, the way old tattoos feel. Not fresh, not tender, just present. A permanent, specific thing. She sat with her hand there for a moment. Then she took her hand down and stood up. Hale was outside on the steps of the main building, sitting with his bad knee extended and his coffee cup. A new one, which meant he'd made another trip to the mess hall and was running on caffeine and stubbornness like he always had. She came out and sat beside him. The night air was cold and completely clear after the storm, the stars doing what they'd done the previous night. The altitude thing, where they looked like something had polished them. They sat without talking for a while. Then Hale said, "I want to tell you something I should have told you earlier. Not tonight, months ago, a year ago." She waited. "When you asked for the evaluator rotation," he said, "I almost said no. Not because I didn't think you were ready, because I was afraid it would be too easy, that you'd go through a cycle, do the work, produce good results, and file it in the same place you file everything, the place where it goes and doesn't change anything." She looked at the valley. "But it changed something," he said. "You said that already," she said. "I know. I'm saying it again because I want to be sure you know that I see it." He looked at her. "You came here carrying something that had been sitting in one place for too long. And you moved it." She was quiet for a long time. He would have liked this place, she said. The range, the ridgeline. He liked terrain that had some character to it. Hale nodded. Yes, he would have. He would have had opinions about the coffee. Strong ones, Hale said. She almost smiled. Almost. Marcus, she said. He looked at her. She'd used his first name maybe 4 times in 12 years. Thank you, she said, for the placement. For coming. For... She stopped. For staying. He looked at the valley. You don't have to thank me for that, he said. I know, she said. I'm thanking you anyway. They sat. The generators ran. The stars held their positions with the indifference of things that have no stake in what happens below them, which is either terrible or comforting depending on what you need it to be. The selection results were posted at 0700 the following morning on the whiteboard in the main hallway. Standard format, candidate names, outcome, reporting instructions. Mercer had written them in black marker in his precise, slightly architectural handwriting. 22 candidates selected for program advancement. 9 candidates counseled for another evaluation cycle. The hallway was crowded for approximately 90 seconds after the list went up, and then it sorted itself out the way these things do. The selected candidates pulling into their own quiet space of something that wasn't quite celebration yet. The non-selected candidates beginning the processing that takes longer than a hallway moment. Elena stood back from the board and watched. Maddox was selected. He read his name and then stepped away from the board and stood with his arms at his sides and his jaw working and his eyes at the middle distance for approximately 10 seconds, which was all the private time he was going to take before the operational part of his personality reasserted itself. Whitmore was selected. He read his name, nodded once, and went to find the duty phone to call whoever needed to be called. Greer, Santos, Okafor, selected. 2 of the non-selected candidates took it with the controlled professionalism of people who'd been through enough to know that a no now is not a no forever. One of them didn't. He was a Marine raider named Castillo, 26 years old, one of the 3 youngest in the cycle, and he stood at the board for a long moment with his hand flat against the wall beside it. Elena came up beside him. He didn't look at her. I was the best shooter in my battalion, he said, before this cycle. You're still a good shooter, she said. Not good enough. Not yet, she said. He looked at her. Your dope chart is wrong for long range, she said. Not dramatically wrong, see? Wrong in a way that's built in from habits that work at 400 yards and start failing past 6. That's correctable. 3 months of specific dry fire work and another 6 months at distance with the right feedback, and you come back for a reevaluation and you pass. She paused. That's not consolation. That's the actual plan. He looked at the board. How do you know it's 3 months? He said. Because I've watched your fundamentals all week. The problem has a specific shape. Specific problems have specific timelines. She paused. Write down what I just told you before you leave today. Don't rely on memory when you're disappointed. He looked at her. Something in his face changed. Not repaired, not fixed, but shifted slightly. The way a door shifts when the pressure changes. Yes, ma'am, he said. She moved on. Sam. Mercer found her in the range after the posting, where she'd gone to collect her equipment from Bench 1. The spotting scope, the data logs, 5 days of pocket notebooks that she'd been accumulating since 04:15 on the first morning. He came up beside her and helped her break down the spotting scope tripod without being asked. They worked in silence for a moment. Then, I sent the supplemental observation, he said. You told me you were going to. I want you to know what I said. She looked at him. I said that you were the most effective evaluator I've worked with in this role, he said, and that the circumstances under which that effectiveness revealed itself were not ideal, and that the responsibility for that rests with the cycle command. He paused. Meaning me. She was quiet. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know, he said. That's why it means something. She looked at the range, the steel targets downrange, small and still in the morning light, the valley beyond them, the ridgeline above, the specific quality of mountain air at this hour that she was going to miss in a way she hadn't expected to. What are you going to do? Mercer said. Rhodes's pipeline, she said. Lead instructor. He nodded slowly. When? 90 days. Enough time to close out the evaluator rotation properly. Right place for you, he said. She looked at him. Yeah, she said. I think it might be. He finished folding the tripod legs and handed her the assembly. Their hands didn't touch. There was a professional distance between them that was appropriate and had been hard-won, and both of them understood it. Good luck, he said. You too, she said. You run a good cycle. He looked slightly surprised, not at the words, at the way she said them, like she meant them specifically. Thank you, he said. She picked up her bag and walked off the range. Hale's vehicle was in the lot at 0830, engine running, Forsyth behind the wheel looking at his phone. Hale was standing beside the rear door with his jacket on and his coffee cup, a new one, travel size, which meant he'd planned ahead for once in his life. Elena came across the lot with her bag over one shoulder. She stopped in front of him. They looked at each other. In the 12 years she'd known this man, they had said goodbye perhaps 20 times in various places, some of them considerably less comfortable than a military camp parking lot in the morning, and the goodbye had never been easy and had never been long because neither of them was built for long goodbyes. Call me when you're settled at the pipeline, he said. I will. Actually call me. Not a message. Call. Marcus? I know. You'll call. She looked at him. The white at his temples, the forward lean that wasn't quite a limp, the coffee cup, the face of a man who had made a career of carrying things carefully and had taught her, by example rather than instruction, how to do the same. She stepped forward and hugged him. It was brief and slightly awkward because neither of them was good at it, and it was real, which is the only thing that makes any of it worth doing. She stepped back. He cleared his throat, looked at the ridgeline. Your father would be, he started. I know, she said. He would be insufferably proud. She laughed. A real one, short and complete. I know that too, she said. She shouldered her bag and walked to her vehicle. He watched her go. He stood there after her vehicle left the lot, holding his coffee cup in the morning cold, looking at nothing specific. The lot, the buildings, the ridgeline above, the valley below. The same terrain from every angle, the same camp that would run its next cycle in 3 weeks with a new group of candidates and a new evaluator, and would not know what had happened here. Because that was how these things worked, the knowledge staying in the people rather than the place. He got in the vehicle. Ready, sir? Forsyth said. Yes, Hale said. He was. 3 months later, at a training facility on the other side of the country, a new cycle of candidates assembled for their first morning brief. The room was familiar in its institutional way, folding chairs, whiteboard, the smell of floor wax and institutional coffee. Different walls, different state, same architecture of purpose. At the front of the room stood the lead instructor. She was in multicam with no hood. The tattoo on the back of her neck was visible to anyone in the front rows who happened to look, small and precise, grid coordinates in military format. Most of them didn't know what it meant. The ones who asked were told, a place. And if they asked which place, she told them that too, eventually. Not on the first day, not as introduction, but later, when it was relevant, when the work had built the context that made it mean something rather than just something interesting to know. She ran the room differently than most instructors ran it. Less lecture, more watching. She moved the line during live fire blocks, stopping behind candidates, saying the specific thing. She read wind off the thermal shimmer and told them what she was reading and why, and they started seeing it too, the ones who were paying attention, who were willing to look past what they expected to see and look at what was actually there. A candidate named Reyes, 27 years old, prior service infantry, technically strong and socially loud and carrying a 3-inch chip on her shoulder about something she hadn't talked about yet, arrived on the first morning and spent the first 4 hours being the target of comments from 2 of the senior candidates about her assignment to the precision track, which was historically underrepresented by her demographic and which some people in the room had opinions about. She didn't react to the comments. She shot clean scores on the diagnostic and said nothing about them. Elena watched. After the morning block, at the water station, Elena stopped beside her. Reyes was filling her bottle and holding her jaw the way you hold it when you've been holding something in for several hours. Elena filled her own bottle. "Bench 4, she said. "Your trigger brake is clean, but you're anticipating on the reload. It's costing you a half-second on your split times." Reyes looked at her. "I know," Reyes said. "I've been working it." "What's your dry fire protocol?" 50 reps before live fire." "Make it 100, Elena said. "The anticipation is built deep. 50 isn't enough to replace it." Reyes looked at her, something in the look that was measuring something. "Does it go away?" she said. Elena looked at her. "The anticipation?" Reyes glanced at the candidates across the lot. "The other thing." Elena was quiet for a moment. "No," she said. "It doesn't go away. You get better at knowing it's not the point." Reyes looked at her water bottle. "How?" "You hit enough steel," Elena said. "Eventually the sound matters more than what they said." Reyes was quiet. She capped her bottle. 100 reps, she said. "Tonight," Elena said. She walked back toward the line. Reyes watched her go. She looked at the range, the steel at distance, the heat shimmer above the valley floor, the target small and still and waiting. She finished her water and went to work. That evening, after the candidates were released, Elena sat at the bench that served as her desk in the small instructor's office. A room barely large enough for the desk, and 2 chairs and a filing cabinet that was already accumulating the paper weight of a new cycle. She had a notebook open. She was writing candidate observations, the same small, even hand, the lines straight without ruled paper. She reached the end of a page and stopped. She sat back. She reached up and touched the back of her neck. The coordinates, the skin over them. She sat with her hand there. She thought about a ridge she'd never been back to, and a man who'd made a decision that she'd spent 12 years making worth it. She thought about what he'd known, doing what he'd done, about what would come after, whether he'd trusted her to carry it or had simply believed, without the luxury of certainty, that she would. She thought about Reyes tonight doing 100 dry fire repetitions in her barracks room, breaking an anticipation pattern that had built over years, building a better 1 rep by rep in the dark. She thought about Maddox, somewhere in an advanced pipeline right now, adjusting 2 MOA right on a dope chart that had been slightly wrong for 8 years. She thought about Whitmore, who had filed the form. She took her hand from her neck. She looked at the notebook. She picked up the pen and wrote the next line. Outside, the range was dark and quiet, the steel targets invisible at distance, the valley below them holding the last of the day's heat. Tomorrow the line would be full again and the work would continue as it always had, as it would after her. The long, ordinary, necessary labor of making people better at the things that matter, one correction at a time, one shot at a time, until the knowledge lived in them, and not just in her. The pen moved. The page filled. She didn't look at the window. She already knew what was out there. The measure of what you carry isn't the weight. It's whether you can still move forward, and whether you think to reach back.